Welcome to We Get Work and the Year Ahead 2025 podcast series. This year, our special report and corresponding podcast series are created to help you move forward steadily, seamlessly, and successfully in a workplace law environment in persistent flux. Jackson Lewis invites you and others at your organization to experience the report's legislative, regulatory, and litigation insights in full at our website, jacksonlewis.com, or listen to the podcast series on whichever platform you turn to for compelling content.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Henderson. I am a partner at Jackson Lewis in the San Francisco office, and I am the national practice group leader for the Jackson Lewis Workplace Safety and Health Group. Very pleased to be here today to talk about 2025 and what to expect from OSHA and workplace safety and health in general. I am joined today by my very talented partner, Sierra Vieira. Sierra, good to have you on board.
It is a pleasure to be with you today, Josh.
Always good to talk to you about these developments. And you know, if we look back at 2024 just briefly, I think you and I would both say there was never a dull moment for us OSHA lawyers and for our clients, who are having to navigate workplace safety and health requirements, new rules, new decisions. 2025, to my mind, looks different in a number of ways. So I don't know, maybe we can kick it off with that in mind about what we can expect.
Right. We thought the COVID years were wild. But in 2024, we had a lot of rulemaking going into effect. And I am curious to get your thoughts, Josh. What do you expect, given that we have a new administration taking over in 2025?
Yeah. So I think the watchword is uncertainty. And I mean that in a few different respects. Let me unpack that. So I don't think there's any question that the Trump administration is going to usher in a more pro-business, anti-regulatory administration and emphasis. I mean, we see that already with the influence that Elon Musk and his Doge, Department of Government Efficiency group, anti-regulatory emphasis. But I do think that there's a lot that remains to be seen about how that will actually go into effect. And a couple of things come to mind. Last summer, as you know, the Supreme Court issued a series of decisions that really changed the administrative law landscape. The key decision, right, was Loper Bright, which held basically that courts will no longer defer to agency interpretations of ambiguous statutes, but rather the courts will have to interpret and reach the quote-unquote best reading of a statute. Now, the uncertainty there is we don't exactly know how courts will interpret a number of statutes, and that's true in the OSHA context as well. Now, I am of the mind that Loper Bright may not change very much ultimately. So whereas before we had Chevron deference, now we might very well have Loper Bright deference, just a different sort of deference by courts, and maybe they don't call it deference, but it will be deference all the same. Still, what we'll have is agencies and courts taking a lot longer with respect to agencies to promulgate the regulations, right? So now they have to, I would expect, it would take a lot longer for agencies to push regulations through, knowing that they're going to be scrutinized very carefully by courts. And then as well for interpretations of those regulations. I think that Loper Bright will have that effect on agency interpretations and on agency rulemaking. And what do you think about that, Sierra?
Yeah, so I'm really curious to hear if you think Loper Bright is going to have an impact on the national heat standards from being released, right? We've had a heat illness prevention standard in California forever. We had indoor standards go into effect this year. Other states around the country have been enacting heat illness prevention standards. We have Maryland, we have Oregon, we have Washington. But now, the feds have been thinking about releasing a standard. And in light of Loper Bright, I think you're right. Are they going to be going back to the drawing board to make sure whatever regs they put forward are really solid and not subject to challenge, like they may have been protected under the prior Chevron deference?
Yeah, I think a couple things might be at work there with the proposed heat safety rule for OSHA. One is, like you say, they're going to be concerned that will the rule survive judicial scrutiny. But number two, and maybe more important, is with this new administration, the public comment period on the new heat illness safety standard is set to expire. And I highly doubt they'll be able to consider the public feedback and promulgate the rule in the 3 weeks that the Biden administration will have. So, will the new administration walk back the rule? Will they cancel it altogether? It remains to be seen. I think it's most likely going to be scaled back and possibly eliminated.
Yeah. So, along those lines, we have a new labor secretary nominee. And the labor secretary, pardon the pun, but they set the temperature for the whole administration. What do we think that this new nominee, Lori Chavez Dreamer, how do we expect her to impact OSHA's regulatory agenda nationwide?
So this was a very interesting pick by Donald Trump. Chavez Dreamer is a Republican, but she has also voted in ways that labor unions have favored. And in fact, president of the Teamsters Union has come out in favor of this pick. He's praised Donald Trump's selection of Ms. Chavez Dreamer for labor secretary. So when you look at that, I mean, that's certainly an unusual development. I don't think we know enough about her background and the way that she's voted in Congress to be able to say with any certainty that, she'll either push forward a labor friendly agenda or not. But I think, on the margins, things like the walk around rule, right, which touch upon labor issues as well as workplace safety and health issues, she could really be a factor there. What do you think about that, Sierra?
Yeah, I am very curious to see what happens with the new challenge to the walk around rule. As many folks know, there are some motions pending in that case. And OSHA has filed a motion to dismiss the case or, in the alternative, for summary judgment. The motion was recently fully briefed. We're waiting to hear more from the court. If that motion to dismiss is successful, that will solidify the agency's power in this regard. However, if the motion gets denied, we're going to proceed to seeing whether or not we can curtail OSHA being allowed to invite third parties with them to site inspections. So employers all across the country are going to be impacted by the outcome of this rule. Does the new labor secretary take a different stance with regard to the rule, withdraw it altogether, maybe go in a very different direction to derail the pending litigation? That remains to be seen.
It really does. And, I think other areas that we might see some changes in the new administration from OSHA, I tend to think that the emphasis on whistleblower and anti-retaliation protection will diminish. I don't think there's any question about that. Court decisions notwithstanding, I think just the enforcement we're going to see diminish. Even with a pro-labor secretary nominee, I think that's going to happen. But what about other proposed regulations that have, we've heard a lot about, for example, workplace violence in the healthcare industry. Any thoughts about where that's headed?
Oh my goodness, what a timely topic, Josh. It's like we planted that topic ourselves. All right. So nationwide, we haven't had any actual regulations for workplace violence prevention in the healthcare industry. But that is one of the industries where workplace violence incidents happen frequently. There have been, guidelines. OSHA's had an emphasis on reducing workplace violence in healthcare, and they are supposed to be dropping some draft regulations for us this month, December 2024. We have not seen them yet. We are eagerly awaiting them if they do actually release those regulations. As many of our listeners probably know, other states this year have been very aggressive on the workplace violence prevention front. California, they enacted regulations that impact pretty much every employer, requiring them to have a workplace violence prevention plan and training. And then to segue to another state, New York, New York. Yeah, retail employers in New York, starting in March of 2025, they will also have a workplace violence prevention plan and training requirement. Josh, tell me, what's the status? Do we have that template program and template training from the grand state of New York yet?
Well, I was going to ask you that. I mean, that's the interesting thing. There was promise of a model program and model training, and I don't believe we've seen that as of yet.
We have not.
Yeah, I think I mean, what's curious about that is, like the California law that took effect in July of 2024, the New York law, well, it applies to retail employers. It also would seem to require a site-specific plan, and yet, New York has promised a model program for employers to use and to adopt, somewhat, I think, like Cal OSHA did, which proved to be very useful, but it still needs to be modified. So, there's a implementation deadline of March 3rd, 2025 for New York. So I do imagine there's going to be a lot of, a lot that will need to be accomplished in the first 2 months of the new year.
Yeah, one of the more time consuming aspects that we saw on the California side was each site needed to have its own inspection to identify workplace violence risk factors, corrective actions we can take, any open hazards. And employers in New York who are subject to this new law may want to get started on that component early. So by the time the model template gets released, you're not behind the ball.
So one last thing I think I would like to discuss with you, Sierra, since we've been talking about OSHA and agency interpretations and the like, where do things stand on having a quorum for OSHRC, for the review commission, to actually decide cases?
I have no idea.
I mean, okay. Well, neither do I. But no, in all seriousness, OSHRC has not had a quorum, namely 2 or more members, to decide cases since April of 2023. Here we are going into 2025. Chairman Atwood is still the only member of the OSHA Review Commission, and so they can't decide cases. And, ALJ decisions remain out there. And if you're an employer that has an adverse ALJ decision, you can't get a review commission to take up your case. If you're an employer that got a favorable ALJ decision, maybe you're okay with it. But I think for the sake of, having a judicial body, a review commission that, can actually decide cases brought under the OSH Act, I do hope that Congress will turn its attention to confirming nominees to the review commission in 2025.
It's a due process issue for employers.
For sure.
There needs to be a meaningful appellate review process.
For sure. And I think it's a core health and safety issue too. I mean, ultimately, if there are issues that need to be addressed, through the citation process and the review process, then we do need an appellate body to be able to ultimately decide those issues. That's my wish for the new year, Sierra.
Wow, you have interesting wishes, Josh.
I don't ask for much. Well, everyone, thank you for your time today. Sierra, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and talk with you about these issues. And stay tuned for more. We'll have developments throughout 2025 and look forward to discussing them further with you.
Hey, Josh, are we going to be releasing more podcast episodes in 2025?
I believe that's an absolute yes. More to come on that, but for now, I hope you had a wonderful holiday season, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for joining us for the Year Ahead 2025 Special Edition podcast series. Please tune in to future episodes where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. Our We Get Work podcast is available to stream and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as jacksonlewis.com. If you enjoyed these episodes, we encourage you to share any or all of them with your network and leave a review to help others find us. We would love to hear your suggestions for future topics, or if you're interested in being a guest on our show, please reach out to us at wegetwork@jacksonlewis.com. Thank you for tuning in.